All right, let's jump right into this explainer, because today we are tackling something absolutely wild. From freezing Arctic isolation to 60 grueling days of straight-up starvation, we are digging into the raw data from two of MrBeast's most intense survival challenges. We really want to answer the ultimate question here. What exactly does it take to survive when you are pushed to your absolute breaking point? As you'll see, we're going to break down the full anatomy of survival using the direct source material from these insane tests of human endurance.
So what is the ultimate secret to surviving the wild? When we picture a typical survivor, we usually imagine peak physical toughness, right? Someone who can just chop down trees with their bare hands or endure freezing temperatures purely through sheer willpower. But looking at the outcomes of these two massive tests, we really have to ask ourselves, is survival actually all in your head? Is it a game of brawn or is it a game of brains?
Okay, let's dive into our roadmap for today. We'll be looking at the ultimate survival test, battling extreme elements, the psychology of starvation, strategy versus brute force, breaking points and tap-outs, and finally, the winning formula. Moving right into Section 1, the ultimate survival test. Two vastly different environments.
So look at what we are comparing here. In our first scenario, the Arctic Survival Challenge, the danger was immediate and severely physical. We are talking about 7 days of freezing ice, sub-zero temperatures, and the constant terrifying threat of hypothermia. But then, in stark contrast, we have the Wilderness Survival Challenge. This was a completely different beast. It was a men versus women competition spanning over 60 days for a massive $500,000 prize. Here, freezing to death on day one wasn't really the main issue. Instead, it was the grueling, long-term psychological warfare of starvation and isolation.
All right, Section 2, battling extreme elements, the rapid deterioration of the human body. It is honestly staggering how quickly the human body just starts shutting down in the Arctic. By day one, the crew is crammed into a tiny freezing snow cave, getting absolutely zero sleep. By day two, we already see frost nips setting in. I mean, Chandler's toes literally turned white and flat because he couldn't feel them at all, putting him moments away from permanent frostbite. And by day three, their clothes are completely soaking wet from the snow and they have caught exactly zero fish. That threat of hypothermia becomes a very real reality incredibly fast when you combine wet clothes with those freezing winds. And this brilliantly illustrates just how miserable every single basic task gets in that kind of environment. Imagine camping literally on top of a frozen lake. To get food, they had to use an auger to drill through the ice, only to find the ice was actually thicker than their 2.5-foot drill bit. Building a fire to save their lives, they had to use bird feathers just to catch a spark because all the wood was sopping wet. On top of that, Mother Nature was throwing severe blizzards at them that grounded the emergency evacuation planes. And honestly, perhaps the most terrifying detail, they couldn't even set up a bathroom area or a poop tent because doing so would attract the polar bears they knew were actively watching them. No way. Talk about stressful. Which brings us to Section 3, the psychology of starvation. Surviving when the food runs out. Now flip the script to the Wilderness Challenge. The competitors here faced over 60 days of trying to stretch a single, limited pile of initial rations. You aren't just, hungry for a weekend. You are looking down the barrel of 2 full months of severe calorie deprivation. Every single bite, every single calorie becomes this massive mental battle. Do I eat now and risk starving later, or do I save it and risk losing all my physical strength today? Think about how cranky and foggy you get when you just skip lunch. Now multiply that brain fog by 60 days. Decision-making becomes severely impaired and survival completely transforms into a purely psychological game. Moving on to Section 4, strategy versus brute force. Brains versus brawn in group dynamics. This is where the data gets super interesting, revealing a total night and day contrast in strategies. The men's camp relied incredibly heavily on brute force. They didn't even ration initially. All 5 guys just ate from the pile. They held out as long as physically possible until their bodies simply gave out. And naturally, this led to massive morale drops, infighting, and a ton of resentment. The women's camp, on the other hand, played a total game of calculated strategy. They instituted strict daily rationing right off the bat. Rather than waiting to collapse, members made willing, strategic sacrifices to leave the game early just to preserve food for the rest of the team. Because of this, their morale remained incredibly unified and cheerful. Because when there's no overarching strategy or agreed-upon rationing, resentment brews so incredibly fast. Listen to this quote from the men's camp. "I and TJ are carrying the weight of the team, while they sit by the fire." You have players burning crucial calories doing all the heavy lifting, while they perceive teammates, like Josh, just sitting around doing nothing. It bred intense paranoia and anger within less than a week out there. But directly contrast that with this quote from Hannah in the women's camp. "I am stepping out as a strategy for the team. More food for the remaining 4. She wasn't physically broken at all. She was making a calculated chess move. By voluntarily leaving on day 5, she instantly increased the caloric runway for her teammates. It is a completely different psychological approach to the exact same problem.
And that strategic mindset, it paid massive dividends. Because the men were stubbornly holding on to every single player through sheer ego, they missed out on vital rewards. But when a challenge popped up offering a massive waterproof, bug-proof tent at the cost of eliminating one player, Julia from the women's camp instantly stepped up and sacrificed herself. That calculated move meant Phaedra secured a literal fortress that protected her through torrential downpours, while the men's camp was just completely flooding. A real game changer.
All right, Section 5, breaking points and tap-outs, the moment the mind gives up. The data shows us some very specific, fascinating triggers for tapping out. In the Arctic, it was that unbearable combination of wet clothes and plummeting temperatures, literally the fear of freezing to death in your sleep. In the wilderness, though, the breaking points were way more psychological. Extreme sleep deprivation took out Cameron. Pure terror and paranoia took out Patrick after a bear literally left paw prints right outside their camp in the middle of the night. And then there's pure greed. Imagine surviving 60 grueling days out there, only to tap out because you gambled your final negotiation on demanding a 7-day private chef in the middle of the woods. When he was rejected, TJ was left with absolutely nothing. So if you look closely, all of these tap-outs follow a highly predictable psychological cascade. It starts with step 1. Physical exhaustion depletes your baseline willpower. You're just tired and hungry. Then step 2. An external shock hits, like a massive blizzard in the Arctic or a bear visiting your camp. That destroys your fragile morale. Step 3, because your morale is shot, paranoia, resentment, or greed completely clouds your judgment. And finally, step 4, the survivor breaks and shoots the flare. It is almost never just one single thing. It's exactly this domino effect. And that brings us to Section 6, the winning formula. What truly separates failure from success? The raw data absolutely proves that brute force and individual endurance will eventually break against the elements. The ultimate winning formula boils down to one simple concept: survival chess. It is the active management of group morale. It's proactively rationing your resources on day 1, not day 15. And most importantly, it's the willingness to make calculated, voluntary team sacrifices to ensure the unit survives, rather than just relying on sheer, stubborn individual strength. And the results of playing survival chess? $500,000. Because the women's team utilized calculated sacrifices and strict resource management, Phaedra was able to outlast the men. And her victory secured a payout of $100,000 to every single woman on her team, even the ones who strategically tapped out during the very first week. Absolutely incredible. It really changes how you look at extreme challenges, doesn't it? It leaves us with a fascinating final thought for you to ponder. If you were dropped into the wilderness tomorrow, knowing what you know right now, will your strategy be brute force or a calculated sacrifice? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep analyzing, keep learning, and I'll chat you on the next one.